Hi, I'm Graham Nolan, co-chair of Storytelling and Partnerships for Do the Work, he, him, his pronouns, and you're joining a Hey Fam episode for Do the Work, continuing our vital and vibrant discussions for Pride Month. Why did I just mess with my camera? I had it all set. This is the magic of improv, everyone. Before we jump in, Do the Work is a queer creative community and platform empowering the ad industry and marketers alike to inspire, reward, and celebrate queer creativity within marketing and advertising culture. We know that active inclusion for queer talent unleashes untapped creative potential to advance business. When we are ourselves, everyone wins. So today with Hey Fam, we're having a discussion to explore how we, and you, stay creative and connect with queer creativity, especially during quarantine, to keep inspired and do the damn work. So here's what you can expect. Our amazing guests, and I do mean amazing, I'm so excited about this, Nina Kossoff of ThemsHealth and Matter Unlimited, and Chris Bergeron of Cossette, will talk for about half an hour. And so they stay focused on really diving into their creative process. They're not monitoring chats during that time. But submit questions whenever you're inspired, because near the end of the show, our producer Wes is going to read us questions that they can address for a good 10 minutes total. So just specifically not the chat, going down to the Q&A button at the bottom to input your questions. Creativity is what we're all about, and it's a positive energy. So we have ground rules. Questions can be honest and challenging, but they should also be kind. Keep it focused on how we can change the work, talent, and culture of advertising, which is a broad topic, so you should have no troubles there. And just know that we'll get to as many questions as we can, and we have a lot of other Do the Work sessions on the schedule, so you'll get to have a bunch of other conversations later. Housekeeping items done. We're going to let our amazing guests introduce themselves in full to kick off the interview. My friends, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Usually I'm not looking forward to Zooms as I am to something like this, but I'm ready. I'm ready and excited for another Zoom. Who would have thought?
Yeah, of course. Geographic location first, I guess. I'm up in Montreal in Canada. My name is Chris. Pronoun is she and elle, I suppose, because French is my main language in which I operate. And I'm VP of content at an agency up in Canada called Cossette, which is one of the larger ones up here. And I've spoken a couple of times in various conferences around what it feels like to be trans in an agency setting. So that's become sort of my, I guess, evening job in a way. How about you, Nina? Who are you?
So I am in Brooklyn. I've been in New York for basically the entirety of the pandemic, which has been a wild, weird experience. I am a senior strategist at Matter Unlimited. So we're a purpose-driven impact agency. So I think especially right now, getting to focus on that type of work feels super special and super important. And outside of work, I started a non-binary trans health and wellness platform on Instagram called ThemsHealth. That has become kind of its own side project / primary project, just doing it all at the top. And yeah, all of that, I guess, influences me / the work I do. I guess we kind of like joked about it a minute ago in a previous conversation to this, but we were both in that Ad Age. There's an Ad Age article in December of last year about being non-binary and trans in the ad industry. And I don't know, it just like struck me as funny that there we were in December. I have no idea who you are, but I'm like, man, that person seems cool as fuck. And now here we are on Zoom. And I think I don't know, it's just funny how everything comes around, I think especially around identity.
It's funny because obviously it seems that there's, I don't know if you feel that way, but obviously it's become a hot topic. It's something that, diversity in our industry, obviously for obvious reasons, even today is something that has become the conversation. And you could see mainstream institutions and mainstream media like Ad Age, I was also featured in Ad Week this year, are looking for people who can carry the flag, be, I guess, guides to what, queer life in advertising is. And it feels like it's becoming the usual suspects right? The same 10 or 15 people that are being recycled in a sense. How do you live with that as this is not the first conference that you've done and that you've been asked to participate on, and neither is it for me? How do you live with that double hat? You got to work and at the same time, you got to carry your tag.
I mean, it's definitely like a second job. And I think it's something that, I don't know, like a lot of people don't have to think about. Like I need to do my strategic recommendation deck. I need to write a creative brief. I need to talk to clients. I need to do all the things that we all need to do. And then on top of that, I need to, or not need to, I want to, I guess I want to have the discussions about making it better for everyone. But then there is that question of just like the emotional labor that goes into it. And I don't know, I think part of it is, at least for me, like my personality, that I'm like, I must make this better. Like I must, like having met like a queer, like, I don't know, imagine like working with a queer intern and you're like, God, I want it to be better for you. And I don't know, I think it's tiring. I don't know how it is for you, if like you wanted the double role, or if you just, I don't know, did you find yourself here?
It's both tiring and exciting. Tiring, obviously, like even last evening, I was hosting at Cossette, the company where I work. I was hosting this Zoom call for our queer employees, basically a fireside chat where we checked up on each other. How are you doing? How are you feeling? What is it like for you right now? And obviously, and I was the one that sort of, asked to do this. And so in a way, I kind of feel like I'm a big sister, and I'm trying to make sure that the family that I have at where I work is doing well and is comfortable and is well taken care of. And I guess that helps me because sadly, at least it is for me as a trans person, I, especially who came out very late in life, which means that, as you can imagine, I've had some identity issues. I don't have a family of my own. I don't have kids. I don't have, a spouse or anything. So having that work family, trying to care for them when I possibly can, and also being on stage and connecting with others is something that helps me. It's kind of fun that this talk is called Hey Fam, because it's almost as if there was an instant connection I find when I meet other people of our group of tribes, I would say. I don't know if you feel that as well. I mean, not towards me, but in general.
Yeah. I mean, yes, towards you. I think it's felt really special to get to connect with you about all of this. And I mean, like, yes and no about connecting with other people of the same experience, or like of LGBTQ, and especially like trans and non-binary experience in the industry. Because there's like, it's such a weird balance. Like if we go back to talking about doing double the work at your job already, there are definitely a lot of people I've met who are like, no, that's not for me. And I only have respect and admiration for that as well, because I don't know, 2 jobs is a lot. And I think that like finding the people who want to do the work with me, it definitely feels like a quick connection, because like there is enough shared. I think in the same way that like, I don't know, everything with like the 3% conference or Time's Up galvanized women in the industry, like that moment has not yet happened for queer people in the same way. And I think it's a complicated group, right? Like it's so intersectional across so many identities to figure out like what are the things that we all have in common about why this does or does not work for us as an industry. It feels really wild. I don't know. So one of the things you said earlier, or I kind of started thinking about with like you watching out for the rest of the family at your agency that you have, is sort of the idea of power that comes into it as well. So you're like a VP, head of content, like that is, that's a powerful position. Right now I'm like a senior strategist, or I've operated as like senior strategist director. And that's not as senior. And so I'm curious, like how do you see like levels of power coming in, both from the community or from outside of the community, in the agency to like make it better?
Well, so, there's a lot to unpack there. A couple of days ago, I had my yearly evaluation. So basically, it's a peer evaluation, and it's colleagues and people who work with me. How and they evaluate how good or bad of a leader I am. And one of the things that came out, which and it was a positive evaluation, knock on wood, it was good. However, there was one line that struck me, which is this year she focused a little bit too much on her cause.
Mm.
And I understood what that person was saying, which is, your job is not just being out there, doing conferences across my country, Canada, but also some in the States. My job is also taking care of all the creatives where I work, and not just the queer ones, and not just, and so as a leader, it's hard to find that balance where I want to focus on making life better for people like me, not just in the industry, but in my society where I live. So I do a lot of radio shows. I do a lot of, I go beyond the spectrum of advertising when I speak. And at the same time, I still have that hat that is really important of being one of the creative leads at Cossette. And so to make sure that we remain a very good agency in our market. And I don't know, it goes back to what you were saying earlier. It is tiring, but there is power. And the beauty of it is that through that power, things can evolve, because you can be heard when you've got those little two, the V and the P in your title. Yeah. People listen. They have no choice but to listen. And so I get to speak to very directly with the leadership, with the high leadership at Cossette, with some pretty specific demands for the community, whether it be in terms of insurance or just the way we're treated. So that has helped me a lot. And because I'm a late bloomer, it kind of comforted me in my identity. Not only am I confident enough to say, yes, the person you knew all those years was not entirely me, but now that I'm a VP on top of it, it adds a layer of credibility. So it does help me in my process. Reversely for you, I imagine it, and I've lived it as well. It can't be that easy to go up and not have somebody like you that can help you up the ladder.
Yeah.
Have you had to look for that somewhere?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely funny what you said about the feedback of getting like focused too much on her cause type of thing. Because I think that especially for younger queer employees or for any marginalized identity who's pointing something out in a system or in a project or whatever, it's so easy that people cast you off as like, oh, that's just like a personal issue to you, or like, oh, I know that like that's the thing that bothers you. Yeah. And in like some messed up ways, it feels oddly comforting to know that that's coming at you too at that level. Just as far as like how people are want to see focus on identities. But yeah, I mean, I've never worked for anyone who's looked like me or had an experience like me. I mean, obviously there's a lot of overlap, and I have a lot of really supportive allies and advocates and mentors throughout my career that have like learned about it, which is really important. And I think a big part of what is needed to change it. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's being like a more mid-junior level person, like it's scary to voice your opinion sometimes. And I think especially from like younger folks I worked with, they're so nervous to say anything. And that's like a good or a bad thing on my part, that I'm just like, I don't care. Like I'm gonna say it because I'm tired, and I'm gonna voice what's wrong with this, and whatever happens, happens. And so far it's been fine because I know I'm good at my job. And I know I'm right too, but I know that a lot of people don't have that benefit. And like you can risk your career by saying what's right for communities. I know that one thing that we sort of mentioned the other day and that I would love to talk more about now is like the idea of allyship, and like you and I are not doing this alone. And we know that there aren't a ton of, I mean, maybe there are a ton of queer people and we just don't know. Um, I'd love your thoughts on like what makes a good LGBTQ ally, and like making the industry a safer space for people in a more representative space.
Well, it's interesting because allyship is the thing that gave me the courage to be able to come out and start my medical transition and actually go through the process of transition. Prior to, when I was younger, I worked in a very male-dominated environment. I was running an alternative weekly in Montreal, and it was, a lot of guys. And same thing for the first agency that I had worked at. And so I needed to find the allies first before actually, I suppose, fessing up to who I was and starting my transition. Allyship is so important, and sometimes allies don't even know that they're allies. Sometimes they're just good people who know how to listen, which I think is the quality. So in a sense, building allyship is about being able to look at and help people in the companies we work at be better listeners. That's the thing, right? I think if to stop and listen and get over your own prejudices or your own preconceived ideas of what each other's lives are. So that dialogue is extremely important. And the sad thing is, I think there's allyship now has become a bit of it's a sticker, right? It's something, I'm an ally. You sort of wear it. And whereas listening to each other and dialogue, those are things that are disappearing. I think a lot more in your country than in mine, to be honest. So I do wonder about the nature of allyship in the future. A lot of people proclaim themselves to be ally.
Yeah.
But if you're not open to debate and dialogue and just having people of different beliefs cohabitating, then you're not much of an ally.
I think that it's funny that you say, I've been thinking about that a lot, the concept of like the self-proclaimed ally. Like, sure, but I don't know, my belief is that you don't get to call yourself an ally until someone deems that on, like, it has to be earned. Like being an LGBTQ ally has to be earned and demonstrated in action. Like it has to mean that you are listening, or you are supporting someone, or you are calling out others if they aren't being inclusive. Like it's what you do when there isn't someone in the room also. That feels like that's what it means. And I think that it's just funny, like how many people are like, I am an ally now, and you're like, you didn't know that word last year.
Yeah, well, there's that too. We come with our own vocabulary as well, and it's becoming a trendy one. Hey, part of being a good ally is creating an environment where people can come up with ideas, with good ideas, and without the fear of looking ridiculous or shaking things up a little bit. When that happens, talents like ours or people like us get to express what they are and what they bring to the table. What do you think you bring to the table as a queer strategist, creative? Do you think there's something in our experience that makes us better at our jobs or different at it?
I think, well, just to like fake it a little bit, I know we talked a couple of days ago about just like the idea of empathy, being like an other in a space. And so I think that we're finally at a place as maybe that's being generous. We are still at a place as an industry that is so straight and white and male dominated that sort of supersedes everything in terms of where ideas come from and how we judge others in terms of what is, quote, good, based on the white straight male gaze. And so I think just by virtue of having a different experience and different interests and different people around me, like ideas come in a really different way just based on how you live. And I think that, I don't know, it's funny when I've also been thinking about how the LGBTQ community is so, like, it is so diverse who we are around. And I think about how it's kind of a community where you're so conscious of everyone's different intersections in terms of not just sexuality and gender, but also like race and ethnicity and ability and socioeconomic status. It's certainly a place where like people of different income levels form friendships because like this is our community. This is where we feel safe based on gender and sexuality. And so you have, or I think a lot of folks can have like a lot more real life learning, I guess, about like what it means to exist in some of the like, I don't know, some of the demographics that we have to write for a brief or something. Like I will fully recognize I have no idea what it means to be a white suburban mom. Like that's just not mine, but I'm more willing, I think, to admit that I have no idea what that is. And like, I'm going to try my best to learn. And I think the flip of that is a lot of people just assume that they know. Whereas like our whole worlds are built on like not knowing because the world was not built for us.
It's true. And, you know, it's almost as if, because I feel I've worn so many masks, you know, I've tried really hard. You know, if you had spoken to me 10 years ago, you would have met a very different character. And so the masks I used to wear, you know, androgynous kind of Bowie style person, but then also very manly with a beard and all of that. I've been 5 people, right? That kind of helps me in being a creative because I can remember those codes. I suppose it's code switching in a way, right? But I remember those codes and I remember how to apply them and what buttons to push. So that's sort of the cynical approach to it. The fact that I've hidden for so long makes me more performant in a way. But on the positive side of things, you mentioned empathy, but I think the notion that everybody's got a backstory, everybody has something that happens, you know, behind the mask is something now that I've obviously very much understood, and so I like to speak to and learn about others. I think that's the most important thing. And if you're in advertising and you work, you know, in strategy or content like me, then that's all it is about, right? Connecting and reaching out and telling people stories in a way that doesn't feel like an insult to them, in a way that's empowering. One of the things that I think where I have a hard time connecting with the rest of the industry is the whole obsession with awards. You were saying, right? Awards are built. It feels even today where they're trying to be a lot more open, and I just don't care about awards. I've never been to Cannes. I don't plan on going. It's honestly, maybe it's because I came into advertising later in life. That too, I did everything late in life, but I came to advertising to transition, actually. That was why I decided to go to advertising, because I thought it was a more open space than the world of journalism. And also I could do it while hiding.
Right.
Not just have cameras on me as I was doing it. But anyways, the whole structure of advertising built around laddering up and leveling up with you know, larger accounts and more awards, that feels like it serves a very specific type of people. And just to be in the room, to be able to get to those ideas that win those awards, that is a battle for people like us still. I don't know if that's how you,
Absolutely. I mean, even just like in how people operate, like so many people they're drawn to others who you can have shared experiences with. And so we have such like a boys club thing. Like I remember so specifically seeing creatives like women and people of color just like really upset because there'll be something that would be like the can brief for the account and they would not be asked to work on it. And so a big part of like forcing myself into making people listen to me, I would be like, you are taking these other people onto this brief. We are having other voices on this brief and just sort of forcing it. But it's crazy that has to happen just because Others are more comfortable working and listening to people who look exactly like them. And that's how you sort of like get the same types of ideas. It's maybe less challenging if you have someone who doesn't have the same perspective of you as you, and that all of that just like feeds up into like the award machine, and just, I don't know, it's such a self-perpetuating thing. I don't know, like, yeah, it's so frustrating to be like, God, this is the thing that helps advance your career, but like to get the thing that advances your career, you have to play into this weird system that was not built to include someone like me.
But I found, oddly enough, if you're the outlier, as I am in my company, there are very few trans people that I know of where I work. I feel I'm more allowed to say things like, I don't care about contests. They're like, yeah, we know why.
Totally.
And I don't get represented for it.
Yeah.
Sometimes they tell me you should, but most of the time they respect that I don't, as long as I do the work. So sometimes being different also gives us the opportunity to change things from the inside and also voice very unpopular opinions.
Yeah.
There's a risk to that, though.
Totally.
Have you ever felt that pushback, though? You've been unpopular and then, yeah, you felt it?
All the time. I had, I actually, back to the beginning of the conversation, talking about reviews. I remember when I was a planner, like it was my first like step up from being like a junior level person into like more of a role of like, whatever, I don't know, seniority. But I remember one of the reviews I had was that I was too political. And I had a little light box sign on top of my desk, and it was 2016, and I wrote "fuck Trump" on it because like that was a feeling that me and everyone around me was having, except maybe like the covert Trump supporters in New York, which like we know that they're here too. And I got so much shade from like superiors about that, and then I got it in my review that I made everything political, and it was one of the most infuriating experiences to feel like yeah, literally my existence is political. There is still legislation in the US, there is still violence against people in my community across all of my identities, and like, yes, of course I am political, and if you don't want that in advertising, then how can you possibly claim to represent or to understand culture? And I think that that's like, it's such a cop out, I think, for people in charge or like directors, C-level, whoever, to say that like someone's opinions are merely like them just being too political or them just being too confrontational and writing it off because of their identity. Where if you could just have an honest dialogue like you're talking about, you probably will get to something better, because you can't grow without understanding like the challenges set in front of everyone.
Well, that's the thing. You know, I'm also very political in a sense, and I sort of claim the right to be, and so I speak out often to clients, often very directly. Sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't. Most of the time they respect it, but they also get the feeling that I'm not dogmatic in my approach, which is I understand that I might be speaking to somebody who has a different view from mine and a different experience, and I'm trying to push them along through, you know, I guess Plato's thing, right? So questions and answer, and you know, like, so I think it's great that we do these little, you know, chats like we have now, right? Which is I imagine a lot of queer people listening and us. I think it's going to be more. I think it's more interesting though, if we reach out to the rest of the community, or you know, and have those dialogue more in the open. I guess it goes back to the notion of finding the right allies. Do you have like sparring partners? Have you met people that you've disagreed with but that you've loved chatting with at the same time? Does that still happen?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely. I mean, the agency I'm currently at, because we're in social issue work, there's a lot more room for it, which I think is a really special thing that I wish bigger agencies had just for any work. Like the fact that we do impact work necessitates it, but I think so does everything else, because if we're dealing with people at large, like they're interacting and they're part of these too. And I think if anything, like all of everything happening with this moment of reckoning with Black Lives Matter, for all of the brands who are like, we support you, we support Black people, and so many consumers and so many employees being like, no, you absolutely do not. Yeah. It's like there needs to be more room for that conversation. And we know that there, like, how many steps happened before like a big misstep. I don't know,
I'm very optimistic though. I do feel that the world is shifting, and yeah. You know, this is an amazing time, I think, because you said the word intersectional quite a bit, you know, in the past 15, 20 minutes, and the fight that is going on now is just it's just, you know, the loudest of a lot of fights that we're going to see, you know, around here. You know, we're seeing here up in Canada with Indigenous voices rising up, you know, we're seeing queer voices rising up, and more importantly, we're seeing these people that weren't natural allies connecting and building bridges, you know, between those communities. And all of a sudden, you realize that there's a lot more of us being people who are not the old majority, right? So what do you think the industry will look like when it's ours? And I say when because it's only a matter of time.
I mean, I hope it just looks representative of, I don't know, the country, like slightly more representative of places where we live. And like that necessitates so much to get there. Like I've been spending a lot of time this year thinking about even just the concept of internship programs in the US. I don't know how they work in Canada, but just the fact that like we have internships in New York that are low paid, as far as not a ton are left unpaid anymore. I feel like that's got a state law or something at this point, but that you like low paying internships that need you moving somewhere or giving up time for another job, like that is a problem of accessibility. Or the thought of like ad schools and all of those. I spent the first, I don't know, three odd years of my career just being like, oh my God, I don't know anything. I didn't study advertising. All I did was like queer and social theory. And now look at me. But like all of those different barriers to just get into the industry. And then once, like, assuming you make it through all of those, and you're met with a panel of interviewees or C-level leadership that all just kind of look alike or all kind of have the same thing, or I don't know, like there's so much room. But I think that hopefully we'll get to a place where I'm not the only brown person in a room, that I'm not the only woman in a room, I'm a non-binary person. And that, like, it happens in instances, but like those still feel so clear. Like I'm very conscious of when I'm not the minority in a room, and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think it'll look like?
Well, I mean, the numbers game is what it is, right? There are few of us being, you know, non-binary or just gender diverse. So the future for us, I think, is about coalition building as much as possible. So, you know, I would love to see more, you know, a Muslim woman with a veil, you know, VP. I would love to see, you know, that's what I'd like to see. All the forms of diversity present in
like,
and also one other thing. Oh, sorry, I just cut you. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just thinking about like just little basic stuff. I remember being in an agency, and I asked if I could change first of all, they locked the American Disabilities Act compliant, like wheelchair accessible bathrooms. It was locked. And so that's insane. Number one, that you don't have a way to just like that shows you who's not invited. And then there were these like super shame oriented stickers near the elevators about walking up and down between the floors of the agency, which just like fully erases anyone with a visible or an invisible disability who need to take an elevator. And like just like that tiny, that's not even tiny, that's like a pretty major thing to just like, that's part of the culture, like all of that. And all of those things signal who is not allowed in a space. Like if you were to come in and not be able to take the stairs and see a sticker shaming you for not taking the stairs, that's going to tell you who feels invited to something.
That goes back to the original question, right? Which is, you know, how being queer makes us better at seeing the world, I suppose, is that once you see the patterns of, I won't necessarily call it oppression, although it is in some cases, but at least inequality, for yourself, then you see it for others as well.
Yeah, for sure.
You know? And then you start seeing how unfair the world is in so many ways.
Yeah.
But then the flip side of that, of course, is being able to switch off that radar and just, you know, sit out on a terrace and have a nice drink, and be able to, you know, not be always on all the time, which I think is something that happens to me, this feeling of sort of drifting away from mainstream society. And I'm a little bit scared of that, to be honest. I'm a little scared of hanging out with my straight friends, and God, you know, all I'm thinking is about picking up all the wrong things that they say. I'm tired of that. You know, we should be able to have our little social justice radar off once in a while.
Yeah, and then you're like, but it's not. And that's just, it's funny. Like, I mean, most of my community, or the majority of my community, is queer, and so like, that, I don't know, it's like my constant. And so it is really funny, like then going to work where like I'm the minority again, and I'm like, oh, God damn it. And like, depending on where I've been working, where that's either like, we're excited about it and you can grow from it, and then like you're back in the role of like educator and additional labor, but like ultimately feels positive, I guess. And then other places where like you're the minority and like you're just too political. But yeah, that feeling of like, I don't know, that sort of dread of walking into a space knowing you'll be the minority, and like what you'll either have to tolerate or how much you'll have to point out, like finding those little things, like you're saying, that are just there. Like, I don't know, I feel like other people don't have to think about that like on top of the normal day to day, you're like, am I going to hear something that's going to upset me? Like just by virtue of existing.
So what do you think is going to happen when we get back to work? I mean, we've been quarantined for months, and clearly history is changing and the world is changing. Society is changing really fast these days. What industry are we going back to?
I honestly can't even envision that in New York. I know that like the technically offices here might be open, but I don't know anyone who's gone back to an office yet. And I don't really, like with companies like Twitter and everyone just extending the work from home for the rest of the year, if not indefinitely. Like I genuinely have no idea like what that could look like. No part of me can see being in an office anywhere in the near future.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's the same for us where, oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say like, what is this more like logistical to COVID-19, but yeah, like what's the thought there?
It's the same for us. We're not going to be back for a while. We've just opened up, and we can go for brainstorms once in a while, a group of 5-10 people. But it's going to be interesting to be back, and it'll happen eventually. We will be back in offices because we're gregarious in nature. Yeah. I don't believe that I see, like you were saying, Twitter and all those companies sort of imposing the idea of working for, well, that just makes islands, individuals disconnected from each other, maybe connected by virtual ties or identity ties like we're doing right now.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important, and I think the whole working from home thing will strengthen that. I think our identity ties are going to get stronger. We're going to build these virtual bridges between similar people. But I am afraid, though, that it might just also strengthen our difference because we need to mingle. in a place. And you know, I've worked with people who have known me as a man, and then has, you know, or at least looking like a man, acting like a man, and then who have seen the evolution. Doing it virtually, going through that virtually, I think it would have taken a lot more time for them to make my transition in their mind happen. The physical aspect of it is so important, and even what we do now, advertising, it is physical in so many ways. You know, it is experiential. It is about gatherings as much as it is about, you know, pushing images on screens. So my wish is that we get to reconnect as much as we can.
Yeah. Well,
Having learned, yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say so much of like the learning and active allyship ends up coming from the kind of mundane or in passing moments at agencies where like you're not going to have it in a formal meeting. And I think that there's a lot of like well-intention and optimism to like creating meetings and creating space for all of it, but like setting it as a time can feel so intense. Whereas like, I don't know, in the same way that you wouldn't want to schedule a meeting to be able to like schedule another meeting, like all of those extra layers, like it's in passing that it's more comfortable to ask those questions. Like I remember doing informal presentations about like gender pronouns at a couple of different agencies, and like the follow-up questions that happen like the subsequent weeks after to be like, oh fuck, is this right? And you're like, yeah, you did it. And like that happens in like in both physical passing and sort of digital, but like it's not the same. I agree.
You know, it's funny. I went to advertising to do my transition, not so much because I loved advertising, but because I felt that it just, I liked the way agencies looked, and I felt that it was a casual environment. Even though we feel the pressure of hardcore business, still it's a more casual environment. And I think creativity thrives on being casual. It thrives on lowering the tensions, making tensions disappear between people, so that the tension becomes more of a creative tension and not an identity tension. And I think it's really important as we speak to people and we do our education work, that we do it, like you said, in an informal way.
Yeah.
You know, this is not, you know, there's no threat of me slapping you back. There's no threat. We'll just get through this together. Which is tough for us, because it means we need to be the bigger people. It means we've got to put our anger aside. And everything I've been seeing right now on TV, all the, you know, the marches and everything that's happening, it awoke in me a sense of anger, because I could relate to just a tiny portion of those experiences, mostly that of being stared at on the street or insulted on the street or not being entirely comfortable, you know, whether it's in a hospital or with cops or whatever. So I'm angry, and I'm angrier than ever. And that is the thing that scares me, because anger can't make you a good creative. Well, if you're a novelist, it can, but not necessarily an advertising, you know, creative.
Or even like in the what is it, like, oh man, I can't even think of the words right now, like the not positive, can't even think of the word, but in just like in being polite and like how work demands you to be polite, there's not as much room for that frustration. Whereas like, I don't know, I think that there is room for frustration, because like that is like frustration and anger and all of that, like if it's, depending on how it's channeled or how it's targeted, like I think it can inspire change. Like if someone can if it's not directed like at someone specifically and with harm in mind, I think ultimately you're like, I am burning this thing, and now you're going to pay attention. And when it happens correctly, I feel like people pay attention and you can grow from it together. Like I've definitely had interactions with people I've worked with where I'm like, this is the thing, like I am so frustrated with this, and then when it's received in the right way, and I think that people being receptive to to LGBTQ people, to people of color, to Indigenous people. Like if they are feeling angry, like we all have so many things to be angry for. And it's, if we need to be polite to get someone to listen, like part of me is like, I get it, we're in an office, but like if we can't show any anger and instead you're being ignored for your anger and that's just being added to your tally of ways that you're too political, it doesn't help. But I think that like those points of tension, I do think drive creativity. Because if, I don't know, if you were in like a creative brainstorm and one person was like, not that, and you're like, oh my God, okay, not that, why not that?
Yeah, obviously, yeah. That isn't, maybe it's my Canadian side.
Just that.
Maybe I'm just like, oh my God, we're not being very polite right now.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that I don't know. I think like on, this is where I think allies can earn their allyship titles. Like shut up and listen for a minute, like to whatever tone is being given to you right now. Like if you don't think that people have the right to be frustrated, then you have not built up your understanding of like what goes into someone's experience. Like if you don't, like if you're nervous riding the train in the morning based on how you look, like you're going to arrive at work with a really, really different experience than somebody else. And yeah, I don't know, that's so many things I think inspire creativity that way.
I think it might, right now I'm writing a novel. I think, first of all, we're speaking quite a bit. I think we've passed our time, but whatever, they'll stop us. But I'm writing a novel right now. And I'm beginning to think that maybe being trans is making me a better artist than a better advertising creative. Because all of that anger, and there's a scene in my book where I beat up a straight white guy with a stick. And it was really pleasurable to write. It was a lot of fun. And I leave him bleeding on the pavement and I grab it. The hero, I say I because obviously I identify to the leading character quite a bit. I take a cab and I leave, and that person eventually comes back to my life and gives me a job. And anyway, so like really like it's revenge porn. And I like to put a lot of that anger and that tension that into this, because doing it through work directly, there are so many eyeballs, there are so many people, so many levels, the clients, all of that sort of checking the work, making it more to their image. I'm beginning to wonder whether I'll still be doing this job in 10 years, and whether I might not just be somebody who, well, I know I won't be doing this job in 10 years because I just turned 45. So no way I'm going to do that at 55. But I'm looking forward to a future where, I don't know, I can just write and talk.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that is even part of the problem. Like, I don't know, neither of us can, I'll speak for myself too. Like, I can't really conceptualize being in advertising for forever. Like, but it's because of the structure with which it was built. I remember when I first started my very first ad job, and friends are like, oh my God, is it like Mad Men? Ha! And I was like, no. And then I got there and I was like, oh fuck, like it is, isn't it? And it's just like, this is the world that we've built, and sort of what we were talking about earlier. I've never met someone who looks like me in like a way more senior level role, and we all just kind of phase out at a point. So I don't know if it like, I don't know if I'd be like, oh, it's like you and your artistry, and like I want you to go explore that. And then another part of me is like, do you want to, are you ready to leave advertising, or are marginalized identities ready to leave advertising because it was never built for us anyway? So we're just like, well, I'll just like cash in now and like go do something else that brings me joy. I don't know, that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough because we have that added responsibility that obviously the industry is putting on our shoulders through events like this, through the Ad Age article that we're both featured on, or whatever, which is to change the industry. It's now, we've been, what is the word in English? Night. You're right.
Appointed.
Knighted. We've been knighted, and so now we have to go fix those problems. And God forbid we should think that, you know, in a couple of years I want to do something else, and the industry will not be fixed by that time.
Yeah.
So, hi everyone. This is your producer checking in. We are getting close to time. It's been such a great conversation. We didn't want to interrupt it, but we do have a few questions that have come in the short time that we have. I'd love to ask one.
Yeah.
So the question, which kind of fits nicely as you're wrapping up and talking about, you know, how do you grow in the industry and finding role models and ways to connect and actually doing it authentically. The question is, what are the best ways brands can connect with the trans and non-binary community? And how do you recommend they show up? And what steps can they do to help communicate better? This kind of fits naturally into what you're talking about. So how can brands and industry agencies connect with the trans and non-binary community better, and ways they can actually show up?
Money. Like, I don't know, that's one of the first ones that, like, not the first, that's like the main thing that comes to mind. Like, not just like hire, invest in, pay non-binary and trans talent, support non-binary and trans creators, support non-binary, trans, LGBTQIA plus organizations, put in the time and investment in like policies inside the agency. There's just, I don't know, every time people are like, how do we connect with this marginalized audience? All I know how to ask is like, what are you doing behind the scenes to make it right? Like, I don't care how you communicate it. Like, what are you actually doing? And I know, Chris, we talked about the other day, like some of the policy work that you've done at your agency. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Well, yeah, I think for a company that wants to play in that field right now, and we're seeing it these days, you know, your internal politics, your internal systems is your external message.
Yeah.
Now, there's no, you can't say one thing and not do it. So you have to work on yourselves first. And one of the issues I have with my own career is that right now I haven't had a lot of experience building campaigns for my community. In fact, I've had none or very few. Most of the time I work on a very mainstream thing. What I've worked on is to make sure that the company I work at is a good place for people like me. And so I worked on rituals, meeting spaces where we can meet together. There was a whole work on gender neutral washrooms. There was a work on insurance policies where now it's possible to, you know, you can have what we call transition leave, which is, you know, if you're going to go get some kind of surgery, then you get a couple of weeks off and not lose your job, right? So now that we've done these things, I feel we are more credible as a pro LGBTQ plus company, as opposed to a lot of companies that I see today in advertising that have made these wonderful campaigns and yet have no internal plan. I wouldn't go work for those companies, that's for sure. I wouldn't go work for an agency based on their portfolio. I would go work for them based on their internal politics. That is the thing that I think we look at mostly, because our bullshit meter is quite accurate.
Yeah.
And then, so actually that's your producer back again with another question. Are there any brands you feel are doing a good job of telling nuanced versions of non-binary, gender non-conforming or trans lives through their work? So thinking beyond their workplace environment, but what stories have brands or that are doing a good job of telling the nuanced versions of these stories?
You know, there's been so sort of, I guess it's been a trend recently, right? Whether it's Starbucks, you know, with the campaign they did last year. One thing that I found really interesting, because it has a failure built in it, is the whole Monroe Berghoff story arc that happened with L'Oreal in the UK, where she was a spokesperson, and so she was in one of those beautiful ads. She's a beautiful trans woman and of color, and she spoke specifically against systemic racism. I forget whether it was through a tweet or on actual TV or something. I don't know, but she spoke quite loudly. It was heard, and L'Oreal cut them.
Mm-hmm.
And what followed then is that she told that whole story. She switched to another brand. She went to a competitor. And recently, a few weeks ago, the new president of L'Oreal in the UK reached out to her again, put her on a committee. And so the work was one thing.
Mm-hmm.
The inside, the internal politics followed the work.
Yeah.
It was delayed. It was sort of like in the wagons in the back eventually, but I guess it pulled in the right direction. And what you're getting now is a very strong PR story, which the media is covering, and that is stronger than an actual campaign.
Yeah, I think that's where the work is, like the most meaningful work to me from bigger brands ends up being in what they're actually doing and not the story they're telling. And like you're seeing, was it like a Super Bowl ad a couple of years ago, like Coca-Cola threw in a they them pronoun into a TV spot and everyone was like, holy shit. And like, is it that important? But I think that like to find the representation of the community at this moment, you still need to go down, not down, but you need to find the smaller actual trans and non-binary owned brands or companies who know how to tell their own story. Because right now we have an industry run largely by cisgender people claiming to know how to tell the stories. I think that it was either last year or the year before, Vice magazine did a photo shoot to create like a trans and gender non-conforming inclusive stock photo option. And I'm sure creatives know how awful stock photos are just on the whole. I saw someone just trying to find like black hands doing something with food, and they had such a hard time finding just like a black person's hands in stock imagery. Like that's not even who's represented there. So that Vice example, but that's another that's doing, it's not storytelling. I don't know, in like a weird way, we're not at the storytelling phase because no one is doing a good enough job.
I think the important phase is the customer experience. As a brand, that's where you want to be, to offer a good customer experience to trans people. If you're a clothing store, how do you treat trans women? What is it like for them in a changing room? Or trans men, for that matter, and everybody else. What is it like, you know? Are they trained to use the proper pronouns? Or do you get stared at? You know, so that often brands will speak, just like that L'Oreal example, will say something, do the contrary, right? So it's the experience, whether it's the product you put out there, the way people interact with it, what happens in your retail spaces. In many ways, I found that retail was therapy for me. I mean, not in the sort of ditzy kind of way, but to go into a store and to be treated as a woman like any other woman, that to me was stronger than any campaign. And the stores that do that well with me are those, you know, those are the brands I'm faithful to.
Yeah, like
not so much, you know, whatever the campaigns they do. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's just like more testament to the fact that like we are, especially big brands, are so painfully far behind where they should be in treating queer, trans, non-binary people as people, that I don't know, there is no way that I feel like I would trust a big brand storyline about that right now. It's something that I'd be like, oh, that's like, we'll have the like, oh, that's nice moment. There was like there was that secret deodorant commercial a few years ago. But I don't know if you like, what is that? What is the brand's or the parent company's actual treatment of trans employees? And I think that in a strange way, like there aren't as many good narratives because brands are afraid to tell the narratives because they either don't have representation to help them write them accurately, or they don't have policy or precedent in place to have the authority to do so.
Another thing also is the power of media buying, which is back media outlets, shows, you know, creative stuff that tells queer stories, because culture obviously is you know, sort of the main thing that changes society. It's through shows and through books and through movies and through, you know, media outlets that people build their world vision, quite, you know, their vision of the world. And
Can
so
I interrupt you for a
yeah.
really fast moment? Have you seen the new Laverne Cox documentary?
Yes, I watched it this
Oh
weekend.
my God, it's so good. And
It's so
so,
good.
and then also like deeply distressing to anyone watching this, highly, it's like the hour plus version of everything Chris just said.
It's you have to. It's called Disclosure, and it's on Netflix, and it's absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. There goes my video. That seems like a good point to jump in, considering that now everyone has some cool homework to do in terms of watching the documentary. I want to thank you both so much for this conversation. It was truly like energizing, and I loved it so much. The fact that you cover like empathy in terms of emotional labor and then anger, which never gets discussed. I'm such a big fan of like trying to use anger as a positive thing. So I'm so glad that you touched upon that. I think that, the two big points that sort of that came up specifically and kept recurring is that how we too often ignore in our culture and our industry culture that, specifically our existence is certainly a political thing, and it doesn't do us any favors to pretend it's not. And then in another sort of area that, we also don't often enough address the simple beauty of our work in terms of how it's just about getting to know other people. So, every emotion, every kind of dynamic. This was an amazing conversation. So thank you both very much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It was a huge pleasure.
Well, good. And as is already quickly becoming one of the sign-offs on this before the housekeeping issues is, I hope you're best friends from now on at this point. It seems like the conversation is flowing super freely, so that's really great to see. That has been this week's episode of Do the Work. To check out the next episode, find the schedule at dothework.com, and that's work spelled W-E-R-Q for those of you who haven't found the website already. Tomorrow, check out our live recording of Open Office Hours with my fellow Do the Work court member and karaoke expert, Andrew Hamp. Maybe you can request karaoke songs for him on the show. At the website, you can also sign up for more email updates and community connection activities. And please follow us at Do the Work on Twitter and Instagram. And of course, you can also find us on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. Know that if you loved this conversation and want to share it, we're probably about a week away from having the full footage up on our YouTube channel, so you can share it with other people. Again, thank you all of our guests and our audience for watching, and thank you to our amazing conversation leaders for having the great conversation. And there's a dog now.
We're away in here right at the end.
Perfect ending to the show.
I think I can beat you. Hold on.
Whoa, wait. This is impressive.
We got a competition. No. Perfect. Oh yeah.
It's kind of the same.
This is the perfect sign off. Thank you all very, very much for being a part of the conversation, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you. Bye.